Welcome everyone again to our program this evening. My name is Jessica Lorai. I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. We are a nonprofit organization and our mission is to unify people through relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And so we have a special guest with us this evening. His name is George Wolfe. And George is Professor Emeritus at Ball State University, where he served as director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies from 2002 till 2006, and coordinator of outreach programs from 2007 to 2014. In 1999, he and Reverend Thomas Perchlik formed the Muncie Interfaith Fellowship, which is now a cooperation circle within the United Religions Initiative. George is a certified mediator and was trained to conduct interfaith dialogue at All-Faiths Seminary International in New York City and at the Lakeshore Interfaith Institute in Ganges, Michigan. He was a recipient of an open fellowship from the Eli Lilly Endowment, which made possible his first trip to India, where he became interested in the nonviolent philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. George received his doctorate in higher education administration from Indiana University. As an educator, he frequently lectures on topics related to peace education, academic freedom, and the role of the arts in social activism. In 2018, he was the Indiana Green Party candidate for Secretary of State. His book, The Spiritual Power of Nonviolence, Interfaith Understanding for a Future Without War, has been endorsed by Aaron Gandhi and former Indiana First Lady Judy O'Bannon. His second book, Meditations on Mystery, Science, Paradox, and Contemplative Spirituality, is published by Dignity Press. So I'd like to welcome George here this evening, and he is going to be sharing with us information about how to conduct an interfaith service. So we're excited to hear about it. George, welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to you. And you are muted.
All right, not anymore.
There we go.
I know a lot of people who wish I were muted a lot more. Now, it's nice to see you all here, and I'm glad you're interested in this topic. I wanted to start, well, just by letting you know that several years ago, by that I mean about maybe 15 years ago, I had regular interfaith services here every month at a local house, and it was always attended by between 5 and 14, 15 people. And so I kind of worked all this out during that sort of practice period. I had attended All-Faiths Seminary International in New York City and its affiliate campus in Michigan, in Ganges, Michigan, called the Interfaith Lakeshore Interfaith Institute. I don't know if you've heard of those, but it's been a while. I mean, the people who are running those institutions are retired now, so I don't know if the names are familiar to you at all. But nevertheless, that's where I got my background. Plus, I've been interested in interfaith activities ever since I was in the early 1980s, and then I got a chance to go to India, and it just enriched my whole interest in finding and explaining and making people aware of common themes and teachings that are shared amongst the great world religions. Anyways, I wanted to start by asking you, and this is that you can open it for questions or answers to this. There's three terms I want to ask you to let me know what you think they mean. The first is interfaith, the second is interreligious, and the third is ecumenical. Does anybody have any ideas in your own mind as to how to distinguish between those three terms?
I would say interfaith would be Christians and Muslims and Jewish, etc. Whereas ecumenical would be different Christian denominations praying together, Lutherans, Catholics, Baptists, etc.
Yes, that's correct. And I mentioned that because a lot of people think they're synonymous. I had there was a event organized in Muncie several years ago, and it was advertised as an interfaith event. And what they really wanted, what the people who organized it were really thinking of, was something ecumenical, because they had only different Christian traditions there. But they told me about it, and they said it's interfaith, so why don't you get involved? So I play North Indian drums, the tabla, and I was accompanying the local Hindu singing group. They get together once a month or so and sing bhajans, which are devotional songs. So I said, why don't you go and you can be a part of this? What they were saying was an interfaith event. And so they went and they sang their devotional songs and so forth. And everybody else was kind of shocked because they didn't expect it to have to sit there and listen to devotional songs from the Hindu tradition. That was good for them to hear it, though. But there's something you might want to keep in mind, that a lot of people confuse ecumenical and interfaith, and they're not the same, as you have correctly pointed out. What do you think, though, about the difference between interreligious and interfaith?
I would like to say that interreligious is basically restricting it to people who believe in a religion, whereas interfaith could be more broader to include even atheists and agnostics, because that is their faith, that is their belief. So
Yeah,
that would be a subtle distinction.
I think you're right. That's the way I think of it. And thanks for contributing that answer. Saves me from explaining it. You explained it very well. Yeah, good. Thank you. So at any rate, to think about that as you organize interfaith activities or interreligious activities or ecumenical activities, whatever the occasion is, just make sure you're aware that you need to define those terms, and people will be confused. People in the general public will be confused by them, perhaps. And so that some clarification is usually needed. Well, if I have a general outline, what I did in structuring an interfaith service is I have a general outline for the service. And the outline is kind of an open structure. It has certain components which I think should need to be adhered to, but there's a lot of room for flexibility and personalization within the general structure. So I'd like Jessica now to do some screen sharing and put up that outline for an interfaith service. And so you can see the general structure that I've sort of put together. And by the way, you don't have to agree with this general structure. It's just been my approach. And so I thought it might be helpful to get things started. And you should feel free to suggest your own modifications if you'd like. So, and I have for the opening a candle lighting litany, and sometimes then I follow that with an incense lighting litany. There's another option which I forgot to put on here, and which I'm going to call your attention to, and also provide you a handout for, and that's a water ceremony litany. So that's kind of what the opening would be. And I have here a candle, which I like to use, and I'm going to turn off the light so you can see it better. Just a moment here. Let's see. Well, maybe it's not. This particular, oh, it's not coming through very well here because it's not dark enough, I guess. But this particular candle is a prism candle that if it's dark enough, it exhibits rainbow colors in a hologram. Let me see if I can find a little better approach. Well, I guess it's not going to capture that very well for you. But these candles are available through a online business called Signals, Signals. And if you go online and look for Signals, you'll find this is called a prism candle, a rainbow prism candle. And so you can search for it and you can find it. To me, it symbolizes, because it gives a holographic prism effect. You see the flame in rainbow colors all the way around the candle, and because of that, to me, it symbolizes diversity and harmony together. And so I like to use this as a candle which I light. Now you can use any candle, of course, but you may be interested in looking that up and purchasing one if you just my wife and I, we light this candle when before dinner, and we just have it around, and it's just very symbolic to us. So so that's what I do for the candle lighting. Of course, you can, like I say, you can have any candle that you want. Before I go into the candle lighting litany and the incense litany and then the water litany, I'll just give you more about the overall structure. Then we'd have a reading, and that reading can be taken from one particular tradition or from multiple traditions. I like to take readings from multiple traditions, and usually I like to focus on a common theme. Then I also like to include an original verse from a poet or a local author. If you have somebody that that writes poetry and it kind of has a spiritual theme to it, it's nice to read their work, and they might also be interested in coming to the service. So that's one something interesting to include. Following that, I like to have a contemplative moment. And I'm going to show you how I go about that, but basically it's a group meditation. I call it entering the inner sanctuary. And sometimes you can use music to allow the mind to enter into that contemplative space. We'll talk more about that when I demonstrate that. Then a message of some sort, a message which I don't call it a sermon or anything, I call it a message. And sometimes I explore a common theme. Another time, learn about one particular religious tradition or a particular holiday that might be coming up in a given tradition. And sometimes I would have what's called a dialogue sermon. And this is one where I'd pick a topic, and then I would talk about, I'd entertain the topic a little bit, introduce it, and then I'd ask an open-ended question and ask the people in the group to talk about their own experience with respect to that particular question. That's always nice because it gets everybody involved, and people often come up with some very insightful words. And it's kind of a collective message that emerges. After that, I think it's good to have a designated offering to support a local charity. And when I ever had interfaith services, we never had any overhead. I mean, everything that was taken from in the offering, 100% of it went to the charity. And most often we supported a local food pantry. People gave each time we had the service, and after we had accumulated about $100, I would take it down to the local food pantry, which is at the Friends Church. It's a Quaker church in Muncie. They have a food pantry every Saturday. At that time, they did at least, and that would be our that would be the charity which we would support. Of course, you could choose any particular charity, but it's nice to have a local charity because it shows that you're supporting the community. And then some sort of closing interfaith benediction. I will get more, I'll go into this in a little more depth now, but before I do, anybody have any comments on that particular overall structure that they would like to speak about?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
For the music, I was wondering, do you choose music of a certain tradition to represent, or do you represent music from different religious traditions?
Well, I often, you can do either, of course. I often chose a chant that came from the Taizé tradition, in Christian Taizé tradition. But I would choose a chant which had words that were universal in their meaning. And the people would, I don't know if you're familiar with the Taizé chant or Taizé music, but you sing, it's a very short kind of chant, and you sing it several times over and over, usually with your eyes closed, and it helps to settle the mind into a contemplative state. But there are certain chants from the Buddhist or Indian tradition that might be very appropriate, and those could be used as well. I can sing one of the chants that I used if you want to tolerate my voice. But one I would often use after the lighting, after the candle lighting, would go like this. Light of light eternal, all things penetrating, for your rays our souls are waiting. Light of light eternal, all things penetrating, for your rays our souls are waiting. Light of light eternal, all things penetrating, for your rays our souls are waiting. That's an example of a Taizé chant. And because light is a theme and a symbol which is made use of in virtually all the religious traditions in one way or another. Unknown caller. My wife's phone. It would be something that everybody could relate to. Does that help to answer your question?
It does. Thanks for clarifying.
And again, I'm just suggesting some things that I do. These are, if you have sources of music that you think would be appropriate for a particular occasion, why, it's certainly welcome that contribution.
Don, did you have a question?
I did, and I had a comment. Thank you, Jessica. And you kind of covered my comment. Coming from a Christian Protestant background, I find music, shared music, that we sing along together to be a good way to raise our voices in praise. And a chant would do that if others could join in. But something I like to see in these interfaith services, and I come from a Boy Scout background, so we really push interfaith services in Boy Scouting because it is an interfaith organization. And we often have songs in there. They're generally more, they're not with a Christian background, sometimes not even often with a background of God. but something that allows all the people to share together.
Yes, anything, there's a, there are a couple of hymns in the Christian hymnal church where I've gone on church that are very universal in their, very universal in their text, you see.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. You just pick something that has more of a universal text. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like Jessica to, if you could put up a different handout now. Put up the one on the one, the litany for candle lighting.
Give me just a moment. I thought it opened, but it hadn't.
Mhm. Mhm. The reason why I'm showing this is because people, it needs to be pointed out to people when there's a theme that's common amongst the religious traditions, because people don't seem to do that on their own. If they hear somebody speak from, say, the Jewish tradition or the Buddhist tradition or Hindu tradition or whatever, and they're talking about a particular concept, like in this case, light, for example, it just won't occur to them that light is something which is in other traditions as well, the concept of light. And it seems kind of funny because you'd think it would be so obvious. And there are many themes which are like that. For example, penance, for example, the theme of penance. There's a penitential season in most religious traditions, or some way of that. Every religious tradition has some concept of forgiveness. You know, every religious tradition has a calendar, for example, if they follow. There are all these things that religions share, wisdom teachings, various kinds of wisdom teachings. All these things are concepts that various religions share, but unless you point it out, people don't seem to get it. I can tell you a story. I'll do that later on because that's a digression. I'll do that later. But anyways, this is a litany for candle lighting, and in it shows the people who are there that how light is represented in various visions. So I'll read this. The minister would read, or the leader. You don't have to call him a minister, for example. The candle before us represents the supreme light of the divine, that image in which we are created, from which all wisdom emanates. Then I say, as it says in the first book of John from the Christian tradition, and then the people say, God is light in whom there is no darkness at all. And then the leader says, from the Muslim tradition, we have these words. And from the Quran, it says, God is the light of the heaven and earth. Psalm 27 from the Jewish tradition begins, the Lord is my light and my salvation. The Upanishads from the Hindu tradition declare that the world of Brahman is light itself. And from the humanist tradition, which was born from a period of history called the Enlightenment and placed emphasis on science and reason, people say the word enlightenment contains the word light. Because this perennial wisdom is beyond measure, no one religion or philosophy can contain it in its entirety. Therefore, the light that can potentially illumine us all has inspired the birth of many religions and philosophical traditions, each contributing to the collective wisdom of humanity. So I like to use that litany when I light the candle, because very clearly now people all of a sudden realize, oh yeah, the concept of light is a universal idea. And of course, that can give rise to a lot of different insights and discussion possibilities, which you can open the service up to if you like. You have both, of course, the outer light, and then you have the inner light. And the inner light is often thought of as the light which gives rise to insights, deeper understanding, which guides us in an internal way, and then influences our actions. If you're a Quaker, you'll like the concept of the inner light, because in Quaker theology, everybody's supposed to follow their inner light. So that's an example of how I use litanies to point out different common themes. Any questions or comments about that particular litany? I'm going to read, also I have a litany, well, I have a couple of litanies I'll read too, but before I do that, I just thought I would mention that. You know, it's interesting, the light, you can't really see light, but it is that which makes possible seeing everything else.
There's a comment in the comments chat that says, in Zoroastrian religion, fire is a symbol of illumination, physical and mental.
Now, there's another common theme, which I find very intriguing to look into. So you have Moses going up to the mountain, and he confronts a burning bush, right? You have, I think it's in the book of Malachi, where it says, talking about the Messiah will purify the sons of Levi like a refiner's fire. You have, of course, in the Christian tradition, in the Gospel of Luke, Christ says, I came to cast fire upon the earth. I always like to refer to that as a passage you can't interpret literally, because he didn't actually go around lighting things on fire. Obviously, he was talking about fire as a metaphor for the Spirit. You have references to fire and other, the fire, nothing pure, in the Bhagavad Gita, it says nothing purifies like the fire of yoga or the fire of knowledge. So you have that metaphor being used a great deal. Fire in the ancient, world, you had 5 elements. You had the earth, you had air, you had fire, water, and ether. And of those, fire is the transforming element. In other words, you add fire to something and it changes its form. You use fire to heat, cook food, you use fire to temper metal to make it strong, you use fire to provide light, you use fire to purify. It is the transforming element. And so spiritually, as a metaphor, the fire of the Spirit, the Zoroastrian, would be the Zoroastrian concept of fire, or whether it be found in Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism or wherever, it's usually referring to a transformative idea, something which transforms us into becoming different or better people, something which awakens us to the Spirit. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments on that? I'm going to, let's go back now to the, well, I think the second thing on the opening was the incense lighting litany. So perhaps you could put that up, Jessica. And by the way, you're welcome to write your own litanies if you have another idea. You're welcome to do that. I'm just, these are something to get you started. Yeah. Okay. So for the incense lighting litany, I would have a stick of incense, usually sandalwood, but of course any kind of. If you're emphasizing kind of a Native American theme in a particular service, you might light a sage, something which is more likely to be used by the First Nations people. So here, the leader says, since ancient times, ashes have been the symbol for death, but also for penance and living a life of self-sacrifice. People would say ashes also remind us that everything in this world is temporary, that nothing is permanent. In lighting incense, we perform an action that's totally given away, performed without any expectation of reward. And then I use this candle and I take the incense and I light the incense from this particular candle that we started. For all that remains from this action is ash and dust, which is that to which our bodies ultimately return. We light this incense that our minds may ascend with our prayers, that our lives may become a living sacrifice, celebration, and complete surrender to the will of the Almighty. So that's an example of a litany I would use when I would be lighting incense. The second line of that, ashes also remind us that everything in this world is temporary, nothing is permanent. That, of course, is something that all religious traditions would agree with, but it's mostly emphasized, very much emphasized in the Buddhist tradition. But it's nice to point out that where it may be more prominently referred to in the Buddhist tradition, it is also recognized in other traditions. And of course, in the Christian tradition, you have Ash Wednesday, placing the ashes on the forehead is a custom in many of the churches. So ashes have that, and then the death becomes not simply a physical death, but the death of the ego, dying within, in a sense, living a life of self-sacrifice, in that your life then becomes a selfless. You live selflessly rather than selfishly. Any comments or reactions to that? Feel free to be critical, by the way. You don't have to, I won't be offended if you don't like something.
Well, it's not a criticism in any way, but it's a thought that we talked about interfaith, including atheists and agnostic people. And my first thought was they probably wouldn't come to a service anyway. I'm guessing. Have you had any experience there?
Well, I guess the agnostic, tradition isn't necessarily atheistic. The agnostic, one definition or way to look at agnosticism is that you feel the knowledge is beyond. You don't have the answers. The knowledge is beyond what you have available, and you're still waiting for the evidence to come, so you can draw that conclusion. It's a very open-minded, actually, position to take. So agnosticism isn't necessarily one that would be against certain conclusions that might have religious overtones. However, there is different types of agnostics. So, anyways, that's now as far as the atheistic tradition, you're right. They may not want to come to a service. I don't know, but I like to include. I like to include humanism in that candle lighting litany, because there's a certain illumination that comes from science and reason. The interesting thing is that with the, you had the humanist tradition, which emerged again in the early 1800s and so forth, and that was somewhat countered by the transcendentalists, because the transcendentalists believe that not only do we use science and reason, but intuition and inner epiphanies play a role in finding knowledge. And so that's why you find a lot of poetry in Emerson and Thoreau and the transcendentalists. They're very much interested in balancing the intellect with the intuitive way of assessing and viewing knowledge. So if you were, some humanists would recognize that and would want to feel there needs to be a representation of both. It's sort of like both sides of the brain, you know. you have the intellect, but you also have the heart, so to speak. You have the intuitive, insightful side of the brain. Okay. Anybody? Any more? Mm-hmm.
I have an idea. I want to thank you for doing this, George, and really commend you for the career that you are able to call upon to enrich tonight's presentation. I've been at quite a few interfaith services over the years and have enjoyed them. And my question, however, is looking toward a multi-generational gathering and how we get young people and children involved along with the ages represented on this call, for instance. So one idea that I have had some experience with others is the idea of honoring the past, but not be entirely based on a retrospective view. Origins are important, origins are to be honored, but the idea of bringing more balance and talking about, nobody knows what the future really holds. There's a lot that our different traditions have to say to guide us toward a future. But have you had experience in bringing in that view as well? That also could lend to more of a feeling, a group feeling of hopefulness?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, when it comes to people of all ages, in particular young people, people have to sort of be ready for the interfaith experience. And some people just aren't. And it isn't necessarily dependent on age. So I really haven't had much experience actually working directly with elementary, middle school, high school people when it comes to the interfaith idea. But I do think that I know with my own children, they go through stages, they go through stages where sometimes they need things that are very clear cut and given to them. They need the answers, even though those answers aren't really permanent. And then what I try to do then is try to show that the issues are more complicated than just black and white, or just right and wrong, and so forth. The classic example is, it's always wrong to steal. Well, then you have the person who, the mother who has a baby that's hungry, and so she's poor and she steals food from the store so she can feed her baby. That's not the same thing as someone who robs a bank. You see. So you present at first gentle moral dilemmas, so to speak, to try to make them realize that the boundaries aren't so clear cut, and work from there. And also having a discussion where different ways of looking at, for example, we've talked about fire, we've talked about light, different ways of looking at common themes helps a person find more depth in their own tradition. I did a lot of study of Zen koans, for example, and also riddles or koans from the Taoist tradition. And then I came back to reading the Gospels again, which is from my own tradition, and I realized there's a lot of paradoxical koan-like statements which are attributed to Jesus in the Gospels. the kingdom of heaven, those who are first shall be last, those who are last shall be first. He says, I came into the world so that those who are blind might see, and those who see might be made blind. Now, what in the world is he talking about? Well, you see, those are koans in a sense. And it gave me a whole different way of looking at those particular passages like that. I always like to ask the question, and you may want to reflect on this yourself sometime. What have you learned from a religious tradition outside your own tradition that you were raised in, and that gave you deeper insight into the teaching from your own tradition? And I just gave an example about the Zen koans. When I learned the Zen koans and I studied the Taoist philosophy of Shuangzi and so forth, and then I came back to read the Gospels again, and I had a whole different way of looking at some of the teachings that are contained in the Christian Gospels. So that's an example. We had another common theme in religious traditions is pilgrimage, for example, and I had one where someone from the Muslim tradition would talk about the concept of pilgrimage in their tradition, and of course it centered around the Hajj, going to the ultimate pilgrimage to the Middle East there. But that gave me, a different way of looking at when I would go to a retreat center as a pilgrimage for a weekend. It gave me a different way of looking at my own pilgrimage. So it wasn't quite as dramatic as flying across the ocean, but nevertheless, I was making a pilgrimage. We had a labyrinth walk, where it was an Interfaith Labyrinth walk, and we talked about how the center of the labyrinth would be different for different people. For someone who's Jewish, the separate center of the labyrinth might be a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. For someone who is Hindu, it might be to northern India, where they have the Kumela, for example. If someone is Buddhist, it might be to a particular Buddhist temple. The labyrinth would be a metaphor for that. But you have to sort of point these things out because people don't seem to do it on their own. That's one thing I find. You have to sort of actually intentionally bring it up. The labyrinth is something you could involve children with, I think, real well, for example. I have another litany here called the Water Purification Litany, which I'll just read, and I didn't get this chance to send this to Jessica to display, but let me turn my lights on here again. Yeah. So, say, in ancient times, water symbolized the formless source of creation from which the earth was born. As it says in the book of Genesis from the Jewish tradition, and the people would respond, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. Then the minister would say, the Rig Veda from the Hindu tradition makes use of a similar image. And in the Rig Veda, it says, darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign, all this was water. In the Tao Te Ching, it is water that yields to overcome. Water ever yielding can wear through the hardest of substances. It's in the Tao Te Ching. The leader then says, water also represented second birth. As before a woman gives birth, her water breaks. And then people say, with this water, we celebrate the miracle of renewal, through which each of us is born not of the flesh, but as a child of God. The minister say, a river ever flowing is always new, never the same. So may our lives be forever new. Its current washes every stone, leaving no trace of the past. So may our shortcomings be forgotten, our shortcomings wiped away, and our minds cleansed of selfish desire. That's an example of a litany around the concept of water. And again, it's a way of really making the impression, hitting home the idea that these symbols are are shared amongst the traditions. Okay, I want to move on now to the next part, which is the reading. Well, I think readings is not something I know. I have an example of of some interfaith poems I've written. And so, Jessica, can you pick one of those?
Sure.
And put up this.
Any of them?
Yeah, just pick one.
All right, we've got one opening up here.
And again, I mentioned this, that maybe there's a poet in your community who writes something like this. Okay. This is a poem I was inspired to write. I read Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace is Every Step. I don't know if how many of you may be familiar with that. Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Peace is Every Step. Well, in it, he talks about looking deeply, thinking deeply. He uses that phrase a lot. And so this particular poem, which I call Interfaith Song, came to me from that. So, and this is meant to be read responsively. So the dark bold text is what the congregation or the community would read, and the others was what the leader would read. So listen deeply. I am softer than silence. Look deeply. I am closer than the eye. Dream deeply, and you will perceive my veil. Sleep deeply, yet I remain awake. Breathe deeply, and I will settle your mind. Sing deeply, and you will know my heart. Turn away from the senses so I can draw you near, absorb you into my being. Meditate deeply, and you'll know me as a sightless newborn kitten knows her mother, its mother. Drink deeply, and I will extinguish your thirst. For I am wellspring and ocean, and the primal waters from which new creations are born. By the way, the I in this is the cosmic I. It's not my I. Yeah. Try to confine me, and I will escape from my tomb. Ascribe me a name, and divisions will arise among you. For I am the Lord beyond name and form, the everlasting source of sound and light and thought and breath, softer than silence, closer than the eye. So that's an example of a poetic reading. There is a poet in town here, which I've used one of his poems at my services. His name is Mike Broccoli, and he wrote a poem about the Christian nativity, but from the perspective of the camels that the Magi were riding. So I read that I took it and I read it and explained that here's this poem was written from the perspective of the camels, a totally different way of looking actually at the whole circumstance. And so that's the value of incorporating local poets, for example. Now there's another one, Jessica. Let's see, it's the one. It's probably one of the highest number.
We have 30 and
33. I think it's 33. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me get that one open for us.
I sent Jessica six of these, and we won't have time to go over each one, but this one might be. So this one doesn't use the word God. So this is something perhaps a humanist or an agnostic would feel comfortable with. O womb of life, O source of becoming, clothe me with innocence, that I may refrain from judging others. Clothe me with kindness, that I may not walk past those in need. Clothe me with charity, that I may let go of possessions and freely give. Clothe me with hope, that I may see the good in everyone. Clothe me with compassion that I may feel the hardship of others. Clothe me with love that I may reconcile the hearts of many. Clothe me with strength that I may bestow confidence on the insecure. Clothe me with light that I may reveal mysteries. Clothe me with patience that I may let go of time. Clothe me with courage that I may not fear being chosen. Clothe me with joy that I may uplift the lame-hearted. Clothe me with silence that I may speak to those who will not hear. That's a second example. Like I say, I sent, I guess, 6 of these to Jessica, and she said she could email them to whoever would be interested in them. Okay, let's go back to the outline again. if you don't mind. And, I'm going to, while you do that, I'm going to excuse myself just for a moment and go get my Tibetan prayer bowl.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back. When I start the contemplative moment, I like to use a prayer bowl to ring. And what I'll do is have everybody take 5 or 6 deep breaths, and then I will ring the prayer bowl with their eyes closed. I'll ring the prayer bowl and just allow them to follow the sound as it blends into the silence. And I'll do this 3 times. Can you hear this? Can you hear that? Okay, so if we do this, let's close our eyes and take a few deep breaths very slowly. Let's inhale deeply. And then exhale completely. And inhale deeply. And exhale completely. Inhale deeply and just continue at your own pace for a few more breaths. Now complete your next inhalation. And we'll just continue the deep breathing. And just allow your breathing to return to normal. And listen now as I ring the prayer bowl. And in a natural way, just allow your attention to follow the sound as it blends with the silence. And if you want to mentally entertain the word shalom, or the Arabic word salam, or the Indian word ram, as you listen to the bowl, you do so. And now let's open the eyes, taking a couple of minutes to open the eyes slowly. Of course, I do more with that when we're in the silence. I'll often quote some passage from the Upanishads or some poetic passage from one of the or several of the scriptures. The idea is that, to me, this is the definition of spiritual. It's to try to keep it from being something nebulous and indefinable. I think of it as a shift from the cognitive to the intuitive. And an example I had when I was out watching a meteor shower one night, and I was watching these little streaks of light up in the sky, And I had, of course, the intellectual understanding of what was going on. You know, the Earth was passing through the tail of a comet, the debris left by the tail of a comet. And these particles are hitting the atmosphere, and as you'd see these streaks of light. But then there was one that was particularly bright and brilliant and very colorful. And the streak was just not a little pinpoint. It was a big light a colorful light going across the sky that lasted a good couple seconds. And it just all of a sudden I just erupted with excitement. I thought, wow, did you see that? You know, isn't that beautiful? And all of a sudden I noticed I had shifted from the scientific, cognitive, intellectual understanding to all of a sudden an aesthetic experience. I was viewing this like you would be moved by a work of art. And it touched me on the level of the heart. It touched me much more deeply. And so this movement from the head to the heart, from the cognitive, the intellectual to the intuitive, insightful part of ourselves, to me, that's what I refer to personally as moving from, personally as a spiritual experience. You know, Carl Sagan, I often quote him, he considered himself an atheist, but he said, science is not only is science compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. And I think what he meant by that is because the cosmos and the intricacy, and whether it be from the massive colors and distances of the cosmos and the galaxies and so forth, or whether it be on the mysteries of the quantum level, it touched us in a way that awakened this insightful part of the mind, which made us appreciate mystery. He referred to the universe as the grandest, the cosmos as the grandest of mysteries. There was Father Thomas Keating was a Christian contemplative who referred to God as the ultimate mystery. So you have an atheist, scientist, and the Christian contemplative using the same words, same language to describe what their quest was. And to me, that's what spirituality is. It's the shift from the intellectual side to the intellectual cognitive side to the intuitive, insightful, aesthetic dimension. We call it, I guess, in education, you'd call it, there's the cognitive domain. An educator named Bloom came up with the characteristics of the taxonomy of the cognitive domain. And then eventually they also came up with the taxonomy of the psychomotor domain, and then the taxonomy of the affective domain, which refers to the arts. And it's the shift from the cognitive to the affective that I think is what occurs when a person is starting to enter the spiritual and having spiritual experience. I don't know how you feel about that, but feel free to give me reactions to that. That's so anyways, this is the way I approach the contemplative moment. And of course, there's other ways to approach it as well. But I use this Tibetan parable as you find one that's in tune and makes for a real nice way of entering meditation. And it also, there are people practice different forms of meditation. Some people practice mindfulness, for example, a Buddhist mindfulness meditation. Many Christians will practice centering prayer, for example. People who practice transcendental meditation or TM. But they always have to sort of be in their own separate groups. If you're going to go to a Buddhist mindfulness meditation time, you get the group is just for that, and just for centering prayer, just for other traditions. And with this, though, I think you can ring the prayer bowl. It helps people to enter that inner sanctuary, that inner space, and then you can segue into your own approach to meditation. And if you don't have approach to meditation, I always then start saying some things which help guide people in meditation for those people who may not have a meditative practice. Any questions or comments about that? How many of you here have a meditative practice and they're watching today? Mm-hmm. I'm not able to see everybody, so I don't know how many people are raising their hands, but. So, I guess someone's correcting, is it Taze? Taze is pronounced Taze. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. Okay, so now, then, of course, the message can be a message, take a variety of forms. And there are some people who like to have a particular message featuring on one particular tradition. Like if it's in September or Yom Kippur, then you might want to have someone come talk about Yom Kippur. Or if it's Ramadan, the beginning of Ramadan, you might have a Muslim talk about the meaning of Ramadan. That would be exploring. That would be learning about a particular tradition. Another way is exploring a common theme, and I've given some illustrations in the litanies as how that could be done. And the dialogue sermon, as I say, works best in a small group. Dialogue sermons work well if you're talking about wisdom teachings, and a lot of times there'll be a wisdom teaching in a particular tradition, which will just have a very similar type of expression in another tradition. So I found that to be very effective, different wisdom teachings. Then the designated offering for supporting a local charity, and a closing benediction. Usually the closing benediction, I will, I'll read one. I have I've been asked for several years to conclude the Veterans Service on Memorial Day with an interfaith benediction. And so I do that, and I have one here. Let's see if I can find it. And I'll start out by saying, God of all peoples, author of space and time, we call you by many names, approach you through many paths. Yet we are one human family seeking clarity amidst confusion, truth amidst illusion. So that would be a way of starting out setting up the interfaith theme of that particular prayer, and then the prayer and the theme can conclude in a similar way. So a closing benediction, interfaith benediction, is a nice way to finish the service. And what other handouts do we have that I may have? I have a guidelines for interfaith dialogue. Put that up there, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. So these are something this is something I hand out whenever I have an interfaith dialogue or whatever the activity or meeting might be. So number one, speak in terms of what you believe in and not in what you do not believe in. If you speak in terms of what you do not believe in, you may actually be offending somebody because you say, well, we don't believe in such and such. And it might be something that another tradition does believe in. So we speak in terms of what we believe in, not what we do not believe in. Understand that faith is not blind acceptance, but it means to trust. We have faith in that in which we place our trust. Faith is also compatible with reason in that it is through reason and experience that we determine what we can trust or have faith in. I like to use the illustration of marriage in a sense when you're marrying your spouse when you're young, 20, 25 years old, you don't know what that person is going to be like 25, 30 years from in the future. But you have knowing that person, you have trust that they'll be they'll be the kind of person you can continue to love and share your life with, but it isn't something which you know for sure. So you place your trust. Every long-term relationship like that, which is very personal and intimate, requires faith. And then respect the spiritual experiences of others. Their journey is as meaningful to them as yours has been to you. Then I go through these core values. But all the great religions embrace some form of the golden rule. And it's interesting. There was a famous rabbi in the Jewish tradition, Rabbi Hillel, and he expressed the golden rule. And sometimes it's called the silver rule. He expressed it in the negative. Do not do to others what you would not have them do to you. Whereas then Jesus comes along and he changes it and puts it into the positive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And rather than say, oh, one's better than the other, it's kind of interesting to look at that and say, well, what are the pros and cons? What are the advantages and disadvantages? What are the different subtleties of meaning when we change that language from negative to positive or positive to negative? That's a kind of, that could be used as a dialogue sermon, for example. You read those passages, and of course you can, the other religious traditions, some express it in the negative, and I think the Mahabharata from the Hindu tradition expresses it in what you should not do, as opposed to what you should do. And though you can read those different versions and then have a discussion on the subtleties of meaning when you change it from negative to positive or positive to negative. And that makes for a nice dialogue sermon or message, because people usually can contribute to that. Many associate light with God, divinity, or wisdom, and darkness with ignorance and losing one's way. Each emphasizes, by this I'm talking about the religious tradition, each emphasizes forgiveness and has some form of penitential practice or season. Each encourages a form of reflective interior prayer or meditation. Each teaches humility and that a person should disengage the ego and act from a level free from self-centered interests. Each religion calls upon its followers to share their wealth and help people in need. I remember we had a interfaith dialogue sermon on the idea of tithing and sharing one's wealth, and how that has different perspective. Different religions have different perspectives on that concept. Same thing's true, of course, with humility and forgiveness. Then we've already gone through the light idea on the litany, and that's just basically the same thing. So you can scroll down a little further, and then the examples of great religions making reference to a person's higher spiritual or altruistic nature. I'm using altruistic there because that would be a way perhaps a humanist or an atheist would think of it. So from the Jewish tradition, humans are created in God's image. From the Hindu tradition, everyone has a spark of divinity within them. From the Christian tradition, humans are called to discover and follow their inner light. And from the Buddhist tradition, everyone has Buddha nature. So those are some common themes and guidelines, which I often will hand out. You're certainly welcome to using it. Okay, so I think we open it up now to anybody who has any further comments. I know Jessica said something about me coming to Oxford sometime and actually doing an interfaith service, and I might do that in the fall. Oh, there's one thing, there's certain occasions which lend themselves more for an interfaith service. In fact, if you get the outline up again, Jessica, and scroll down to the bottom, I have some suggestions of that. And so if you scroll down, I have here so some appropriate occasions for holding an interfaith service, and Thanksgiving is one particular occasion where we always had a Thanksgiving interfaith service because everybody celebrates and recognizes Thanksgiving. It wasn't necessarily on Thanksgiving Day, of course. We might have had it the Sunday before Thanksgiving or the Sunday after. But one thing we try to do, though, is not schedule our interfaith services or activities to conflict with other traditions in terms of their ceremonies or services. So when I had interfaith services once a month, I didn't have them Sunday morning. I had them Sunday afternoon at like 4:30 or something like that, because I didn't want it to be, I didn't want people to leave their own tradition and sort of have to choose between the interfaith and whatever tradition they belong to. So, so think about scheduling your services in ways that don't conflict with other traditions. There's an International Day of Ceasefire, which is September 21st. It's United Nations Day. Sometimes it's called the International Day of Peace. In fact, that's what that's most popular. That's the most popular language that's used. But it originated as a ceasefire. The idea that there would be one day where there would be ceasefire throughout the whole world, and that would be a day where then you could get humanitarian aid to refugees and to people in war zones, medical aids, vaccines, and so forth. That they would be totally free from having to worry about being in the line of fire, because we have this International Day of Ceasefire. Unfortunately, I don't think that's ever been fully realized, but September 21st is the day for that. And that's a nice day to have an interfaith service. Earth Day is a great day for it. The equinoxes and the solstice. And you can think of other particular times when might be very much an interfaith service might be appropriate. Okay, so I'm just going to open the floor here, and please feel free to comment. By the way, I saw someone on here. I saw a name that had Talmud afterwards, and it occurred to me once that it's interesting to have the Talmud is, of course, something which is from the Jewish tradition, and they have these Talmud studies, in which case they creatively and critically look at passages from the Talmud and passages from Scripture that mostly is the Torah, but I thought you simply could apply that to any other scripture. The idea of looking at any scripture, whether it be Buddhist or Hindu or Christian, and examine it from the idea that you're looking creatively and insightfully and also critically at the passage. Doesn't necessarily have to be applied only through the Jewish tradition. Well, someone says the bowl sound isn't coming through. I'm sorry about that. It didn't. How many of you didn't hear the bowl? Was that something which, yeah, sorry. But if you try it, and it doesn't have to be a Tibetan prayer bowl, it can be some sort of lower sounding bell or ringing sound that is tuned, and that will, and when I do an interfaith service, I would bring this, you see, and actually you'd be in the presence of it. Yeah, I know that's the problem with Zoom. I'm a musician, so it always frustrated me when during the pandemic, I had to perform and it was through Zoom services, and the sound was sometimes terrible, and it very frustrating to a musician.
Manik, would you like to say something? You have your hand raised there. Oh, you're muted. Just unmute yourself there. Thanks.
Yeah, because the Zoroastrian religion was not in the list that you had, I thought I would add some information that, for example, the followers of Prophet Zarathustra, who is called Zoroaster by the ancient Greek philosophers, they always face some form of light, when they are praying to God.
Mhm.
So like in our temples, of course, we will have actually a wood fire continuously maintained. But in our home, we might just have like a candle, or when we're outside, we can face the sun. At nighttime, you'll face the moon or even the starlight, kind of thing. So that is one thing, associated with light that you had mentioned. Other thing is that as far as celebrating, in the tradition of the over 5,000-year-old Zoroastrian religion, we celebrate, among many other days, the special day of the spring equinox. We call it Navruz, or New Day, and that has been celebrated even today. Even though the Zoroastrian religion is not in other countries, but even the countries that used to be under the Persian Empire, which was from like 6th century BC through 7th century AD, people of Turkey, Afghanistan, many such countries which were part of the Persian Empire, they even celebrate it today, although many of them are Muslims, a majority. So just a little bit of information.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and this is one thing. It's nice to have people that can contribute. You could add to the litany a Zoroastrian phrase there. This is what I mean. I don't mean this to be something inscribed in stone. It's something which
Sure.
I'd like people to bring their own insights to and their own experience to.
Sure.
And interesting, looking now, this Zoroastrianism influenced me a lot.
Right.
In that, sometimes it's called Persian dualism. I mean, you have this the two forces in the Zoroastrian
Right.
that tradition, and good and evil, representing good and evil, and that how
Right.
Good thoughts, good words, and good deeds is because if you try to overcome evil with evil, you're simply becoming you're just contributing to the power of evil rather than the good. So. And then I came back to the Gospel of John and the Christian tradition, and you have all sorts of dualism.
Right.
Children of the light, for example, Jesus talks about children of the light.
Right.
And there's a lot of Persian dualism, and of course the story of the Magi coming to visit the Christ child. The Magi were Zoroastrian, they're Zoroastrian priests at the time.
Right.
So you see, there's an interfaith theme right at the very beginning.
Yes.
That. And so the idea of, I don't know, Christianity got off on the wrong direction when it's tried to say that, every other tradition is wrong, and only they tried to. That's what that started, I guess, when the Council of Nicaea, and when the church got established, and you have power structures, and it's all downhill from then on.
Right.
It gets tied up in politics, and we've had problem ever since. But so Zoroastrian has very, very meaningful to me.
Some of the concepts of Zoroastrianism, think for yourself, and rational thinking, those were also kind of impressed some of the philosophers like Plato and Socrates, and that's why they gave him the name Zoroaster, and all that. And then when the Persian emperor Cyrus the Great, he released the Jewish people who were in captivity in Assyria, in Babylon, when he conquered that. Then some of the Jewish people lived under Persian Empire for a while, and they learned about the Zoroastrian beliefs. And also Cyrus gave them money to rebuild their temple, that had been destroyed by the Babylonian king and all that. And so from Judaism, then, some of the concepts also, they may have influenced Christianity, because after all, Jesus Christ was a Jewish person, and his followers, many of them were Jewish also. So
we have this misconception that back in ancient times, you had the Jews in one place, the Greeks in another place, the Persians in another place, the Hindus in another place, and they didn't talk to one another much. I mean, they did, but the fact is, there was all sorts of cultural exchange going on. Alexander the Great conquered
Right.
all the way over to India, and it's known that he brought back Hindu and Buddhist sages to
Right.
Greece. So, and that's historically been documented. So we, I guess, because things don't happen instantaneously back then, we tend to think that these communities were so totally isolated, and they weren't. There was all
Right.
sorts of. This is why I pointed out the similarities in the first few verses of Genesis. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. And you have something similar in the Rig Veda. Well, how did that come about? Was it just two people had similar insights, or was there actually cultural exchange going on? And I think
Right.
there's cultural exchange going on, and we just are.
And also, since we all believe in this one God, right, or one creator who is responsible for all the creations, all the inspiration, the thoughts, ideas, after all, are coming from that same source.
Yeah.
It just goes to a certain different culture at a certain time in history. And so there are some differences, of traditions and all that. But the basic beliefs are mostly the same.
They're just expressed in different ways depending on what the needs of the culture are and the needs of the issue at the time. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Right.
Yeah, let's if there are any final questions anyone has, we are about ready to wrap things up here. Nikita? Oh, you're still on mute.
I just want to say thank you how much I appreciate it this evening, because I've had a class, or several classes on interfaith, but they never had a service, so we just have to present papers, prepare papers, with groups, like a group will present on Buddhism, another group in Hinduism, but, I don't recall ever had an actual interfaith service, so I really appreciate it.
Mhm.
And also I want to say to Mr. Manek that I never heard of a Zoroastrian. It's 5,000 years old. I never heard of it. So I'm learning. So I really enjoy the experience tonight. Oh, one last question. Being a Catholic living in two worlds, the Black world and the Irish world in Boston, how long should the interfaith service be? Is it an hour, 45 minutes? 35? The Irish Catholic, we say 45 minutes. So how long is it? How long should it be?
How long should the service be?
Yes.
Oh, well, I try to keep them to 45 minutes. I
45 minutes, okay.
I try. Now, sometimes if you have a dialogue sermon, that gets carried away and people just start talking and talking, and
Okay.
but you have to try to rein it in so that it's going. Yeah. By the way, I should mention that I have a member of my interfaith community here who's from the Congo, and he migrated here, and he
For a whole day.
speaks several languages he speaks Swahili and Kikongo and French as well as English, and he's a linguist as well. He taught at the university here in Ball State. So he spoke. We had an interfaith panel discussion. By the way, interfaith panel discussions are particularly effective in getting a lot of people. And again, you get people from very different traditions attending the same event and hearing different views. We had the Episcopal Bishop of Indianapolis come and speak about combating white supremacy and so forth, and we had someone from the Jewish temple, someone from the Baha'i tradition, and then Matuka, Matuka, who's from Congo, talked about the concept of Ubuntu. Ubuntu, which is a African concept of I am who I am because of you. It's a community. I am who I am because of you. Mm-hmm. And so it speaks directly to the importance of relationship in terms of who we are. So anyways, there's a lot of wisdom coming from African traditions, African wisdom teachings and parables and so forth, which are very fascinating to explore. We had an interfaith radio show years ago. It was I have several of these online. There's several of them online. If you go to Converging Streams Interfaith Converging Streams, I guess Interfaith Radio, I guess, I don't know. They're 15-minute shows and of various topics that are explored. And they're done quite professionally. They were aired on a radio station here. And I can send you the links to that,
Yes.
Jessica, and you can do that. But if you Google, and also if you're on Facebook, go to Converging Streams, you'll see there's a Facebook page, although I haven't kept it up. But Converging Streams Interfaith Radio is something you might be interested in listening to some of the shows. And Matuka, by the way, did a couple of the shows for us. They were interviews, yeah. Well, thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate your comments. And it's a nice thing about interfaith, you learn so much because, you know, someone's here that from a tradition that you weren't as familiar with, and all of a sudden there's a certain illuminating conversation that's going on. So I think it's a very meaningful, it's been very meaningful to me in my life, and I hope you find it that is the way it is for you as well.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I love the way you have the service put together, and your suggestions are wonderful. Very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.